going to talk about dividing with decimals. Now, there are some things to remember about division. First of all, the number that goes inside the box is called the dividend, and the number that we're dividing by is the divisor, and the answer to a division problem is called the quotient. Now, we can also write division problems three different ways: with the division box, you'll also see it with the division sign, and then it can also be written as a fraction. The steps to remember whenever you divide long division is that you divide, then you multiply, subtract, check or compare, and then bring down one digit at a time, and then you go back to divide again. The way that I always remember it is, does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers? So I'm going to show you this division problem, and I'm going to do it three ways. This is dividing a whole number by a whole number. Now, what we're accustomed to is doing our regular division. 4 goes into 5 one time. 4 times 1 is 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. Bring down the 0. 4 goes into 10 twice. 4 times 2 is 8. 10 minus 8 is 2. There's nothing left to bring down. So in elementary school, we learned that our answer would be 12 remainder 2. We may have also learned to write it as a fraction or a mixed number. Again, 4 goes into 50. Let's just do this real quickly again so that I can have it ready to go. And this time I have remainder 2, but I want to write it as a mixed number or a fraction. So my remainder is 2 out of 4. So I write 2 fourths, 12 and 2 fourths, which is the same thing as 12 and a half. And then let's write it using a decimal. 4 goes into 5 once. 4 times 1 is 4. 5 minus 4 is 1. Bring down the 0. I'm just doing the same problem again pretty quickly. And this time I have 2 here, and I'm not going to write it with a remainder, and I'm not going to write it as a mixed number. I'm going to add a decimal and a 0, bringing that 0 down, and I'm going to continue to divide. So I add the decimal and 0, bring it down, and so now I have 4 goes into 20 5 times. And so I bring my decimal straight up, which we'll talk about on the next boards, and so I have 12 and 5 tenths, which is the same thing as 12 and a half, which is the same thing as 12 remainder 2. I want you to get in the habit of writing your answers with as a decimal if you're doing division. Eventually we'll get to mixed numbers as well. Okay, now we're going to talk about dividing a decimal by a whole number. Here's an example. 9 people go to the movies and it costs $78.75. How much was each movie ticket? Well, it's important that I understand that I need to divide to solve this problem. And so here I have my division problem. I've already gotten it started. 9 goes into 78. Oh, let's look at the steps first. Estimate. And so I'm dividing 78 or 79 by 9. Well, here's the thing. 9 doesn't go evenly into 79, so I have to come up with compatible numbers. And so I know 9 goes into something close to 79. It goes into 81. 9 times 9 is 81. 9 times 8 is 72. So I know my answer is going to be somewhere between 8 and 9. So that's what I want to do first, is estimate. Then I divide as usual. I'm not going to worry about the decimal yet. So again, 9 goes into 78 8 times. 9 times 8 is 72. I subtract and I get 6. My next step is to bring down. Remember, I bring down one digit at a time before I divide again. So 9 goes into 67 7 times. 9 times 7 is 63. Notice I didn't worry about that decimal yet. And I subtract. 67 minus 63 is 4, and I bring down the 5. 9 goes into 45 5 times. 9 times 5 is 45. I subtract. I get 0 here. I'm finished with one exception, and that exception is that I need to bring the decimal straight up into the quotient. So here's my decimal. I bring it straight up. This is one of the reasons it's so important that when you divide that you line everything up properly. 9 went into 78 8 times, so the 8 has to go above the 8 in 78. I don't want it scooted over here or scooted too far this way, or my decimal will be off. So each movie ticket was $8.75. My estimate was somewhere around 8 and 9. That's the last thing I need to do, is confirm my estimate or check to see if my answer is reasonable. We call that checking for reasonableness. It's a big long word. I'm looking, is this a reasonable answer for movie tickets. If I had gotten $87.50 per movie ticket, would that be a reasonable answer? No. So I would be able to realize that I had done something wrong, either in my division or with my decimal placement. Now we're going to talk about dividing a decimal by a decimal. The steps are a little different, so I think it's important that you write these down separate from the steps that you wrote in the first board. You're going to make the divisor into a whole number. Right now I have a decimal divided by a decimal, and I'm going to make this divisor a whole number. Now I don't just make it a whole number. There's actually something mathematically I'm doing to make it a whole number, but we'll talk about that in another lesson. And then we remember the golden rule. We do unto the dividend what I did to the divisor. So I'm going to go in, I'm going to do step 1. Make the divisor a whole number. Well, I know a whole number has a decimal at the far right, so I'm going to move this decimal one place to the right to make that a whole number. Now that's just the whole number 7. But what I have done to the divisor, I must do unto the dividend. So now I move this decimal also exactly one place to the right, because that's how far I moved this one. And so my new decimal is here, and I'm going to worry about that here in a little bit. Then it's a good idea to estimate at this point. Now I'm dividing 96 and 74/100ths, that's about 97, by 7. Well, I know that 7 times, I think 12 times 7 is 84, I believe. And so let's see 13 times 7. I'm trying to get an estimate here. That's 21, that's 91. So my answer is going to be more than 13 because this 13 times 7 is 91. So 7 times 13 equals 91. So I know that I'm aiming for somewhere a little bit larger than 7. So now I divide. I'm going to ignore the decimal at this time. 7 goes into 9 once. 7 times 1 is 7. Subtract 9 minus 7 is 2. Bring down the 6. 7 goes into 26 3 times. 7 times 3 is 21. 26 minus 21 is 5. Bring down the 7. As I'm going, I'm checking. If this number is the same size as my divisor or bigger before I bring down, then I made a mistake. So that's what the check step is in does McDonald's sell cheeseburgers. 7 goes into 57 8 times. 7 times 8 is 56. Subtract 57 minus 56 is 1. I still have something to bring down. It's a 4. 7 goes into 14 twice. 7 times 2 is 14. 14 minus 14 is 0, and I'm almost finished. The next thing I need to do is bring my decimal straight up into the quotient. Now remember, I moved the decimal already, so it's my new decimal comes straight up into the quotient. And that's why it's real important, again, that you line up your decimals. Line up your digits when you divide and your decimals. So here I bring my decimal straight up into the quotient, and I get 13 and 82/100ths. Now I want to double check if that makes sense as far as my estimate goes. And over here, I know it's difficult to read. I said that 7 times 13 was 91. So I knew my answer was going to be a little bit more than 13. And this is more than 13. All right, something else that you might need to know about division. Sometimes you may have to add a decimal and zeros or just zeros to complete your division. I've got 2 different examples here. Let's look at this one first. This is a whole number divided by a whole number. And I've already started the work and I've gotten the process. I've brought down the 2 and I've divided and I have 6 remaining. Well, remember, I'm not going to use a remainder anymore, and so I have to keep dividing, but there's nothing else to bring down. When that happens, remember where the decimal is in a whole number? It's at the end. Notice there was not a decimal in this whole number. It was already a whole number, so the decimal was at the end. So I can now, once I add this decimal, I can add as many zeros as I may need to add to continue with my division. So I bring this 0 down and I divide again. 12 goes into 60 5 times. 12 times 5 is 60. Subtract, and I have nothing left over. I don't need to add any more zeros, but I do need to remember to bring my decimal straight up into my answer, into my quotient. And again, I'm going to talk you through that because I didn't really talk through that division problem, but I am going to go quickly. 12 goes into 28 twice. 12 times 2 is 24. 28 minus 24 is 4. Bring down the 2. 12 goes into 42 3 times. 12 times 3 is 36. 42 minus 36 is 6. And this time I don't have anything to bring down, but I can't have anything remaining here. So I add a decimal and a 0 because this keeps that value the same. 282 and 282.0 are the exact same number. And so then I can bring this 0 down and continue my division. And that's where I left off a minute ago. 12 goes into 65 times. 12 times 5 is 60. And I'm finished, not forgetting to bring my decimal straight up into my quotient. And here I have another division problem. This fraction is another way to write division. This is a fraction bar or a division bar. It's the same thing. And I'm going to continue this division. Notice that I had a decimal in my divisor, and so I had to move it to make it a whole number. So I move it one place to the right. So I have to move this one place to the right because it's like the golden rule for division or the golden rule for math. We actually use that rule a lot in math. 5 goes into 45 9 times. 5 times 9 is 45. I subtract and I have a 0 and I bring down the 2. And now this is where I've left off and I'm going to continue my division. 5 does not go into 2. I always divide after I bring my digit down. So that's the next step. 5 doesn't go into 2, so I have to say it doesn't go into 2 by putting a 0 there. When we have a 0 in the quotient, sometimes that tricks us and we forget that step. 5 times 0 is 0, and then I subtract and I have still a remainder of 2. Well, I've already got a decimal, and so I don't have to add another decimal here, but I can add zeros all day long because that doesn't change the value of this number. 45.2 or 45 and 2/10 is the exact same thing as 45 and 20/100. So now I can bring this 0 down and I can continue my division. 5 goes into 20 4 times, and so I put my 4 up here. 5 times 4 is 20. I'm running out of room down here, but 20 minus 20 is 0, so I know I'm good down here. And then I'm going to bring my decimal, my new decimal, which I moved, straight up into the quotient. So I get 9 4/100. Let's look at another one. Again, the fraction bar means to divide. So I have 5,824 10,000ths divided by 6/100. I set my problem up. I have a decimal that's 2-digit decimal places, or that's 2 decimal places. It's in the hundredths place. So I have to move this 2 places to the right to make my divisor a whole number. And so I have to do the same thing, the golden rule, move the decimal 2 places to the right. So here's my new decimal. And then I continue to divide like normal. Now notice, whenever I move this decimal 2 places to the right and make this divisor a whole number of 6, I'm really just dividing by 6 now. So 6 goes into 58 because it doesn't go into 5. 6 goes into 58 9 times. 9 times 6 is 54. 58 minus 54 is 4. Bring down the 2. Divide again. 6 goes into 42 7 times. 6 times 7 is 42. Subtract, I get 0. Bring down the 4. 6 does not go into 4, so I have to put that 0 there. Again, zeros in the quotient can be tricky. And I'm not finished because I have 6 times 0 is 0, 4 minus 0 is 4, and I have nothing to bring down, but I have a remainder here. So I've got to go ahead, I've got a decimal already, so adding zeros here is not changing the value at all. So I'm going to bring down a 0 and I'm going to divide again. 6 goes into 40 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. 40 minus 36 is 4. I've got to continue going because this still isn't a 0. So I add a 0 here into the divisor, the dividend, this is the dividend. Bring the 0 down and divide again. 6 goes into 40 6 times. 6 times 6 is 36. Subtract, I get 4. This could go on all day, and I'm still going to have that remainder of 4. So I keep on doing that, but once I realize that this is going to continue, this is called a repeating decimal. Now let's not forget that my decimal comes straight up into my quotient, and that's where I've moved it. I've already moved it. It comes straight up.